folks. Welcome to Fabric of Folklore. I'm your hostess, Vanessa Y. Rogers, and this is a podcast where we unravel the mysteries of folklore. In this podcast, we explore the world through the lens of culture, whether that's oral storytelling, spirituality, holiday traditions, ghost stories, or internet memes. We want to know and understand it all. Our podcast at its core is about finding the heart of what it is to be human and learning to be kinder to ourselves and others through that understanding. So if that sounds like a podcast that you are interested in, please hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple. Please hit that subscribe button so that you are getting our notifications every week on Tuesdays when our new podcast comes out. And if you've been listening to our podcast, please consider giving us stars and a rating and a review, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. That's where you can write a podcast review. And that's so helpful for a new podcast to help people find our podcast. In today's fantastic episode, we're going deep into one of the oldest written texts in existence, the Mahabharata. And y'all, I had to practice saying that word so many times before I did this introduction. At 100,000 verses, it is the longest epic poem ever written. As a whole, it is about 10 times the length of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey put together. The Bhagavad Gita, is that how I say it? Bhagavad Gita? Is that right?
Yeah, Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, which is only one section of the whole epic, is considered one of the most important Hindu scriptures. The story is still popular in India today, and children are named after the characters from this thrilling epic. Our guest today is Parag Shan. He's an author, traveler, and lifelong learner. He worked in the IT industry but felt disconnected, as many of us do, from nature. So he left the IT world to travel, reconnect with nature, his roots, and himself. During his travels, he wrote a travelogue called the Tiravanamalai Beckons. Did I say that right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
About his adventures he had on a 1,000K solo road trip in India to build his work around studying his ancestors and writing about the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. He hopes to continue writing books as he travels to ancient places in India. So welcome so much to Fabric of Folklore.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you for having me.
It's so exciting to have you because you're our first guest from India. So this is a notable episode for us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. I have watched previous episodes and I've enjoyed watching all of them.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey from the IT world into the current work that you're doing now?
Yes, Vanessa. I got into IT around the year 2000 after doing a master's in computer science.
Mhm.
And it was very exciting at that time. There was so much changing in IT, and if you remember, that was the time when the internet was really taking off.
Yeah.
There was e-commerce and collaboration, online communities, and it felt like I was part of something very large.
Mm.
Bringing people together from all over the world, and it felt wonderful at that time. Although as time passed, and I love my work in IT for the first, let's say, 10 or 12 years.
Mhm.
But at some point, I realized that even though IT was changing lives, there were also components to IT that were very negative. So it was addictive,
Mhm.
and that's not just a coincidence, because I've actually been part of meetings where software was designed to be addictive. And just fortunately, I was not one of the developers. I was just like a bystander in those meetings.
Mhm.
But actually listening to a room full of people talk about how they wanted to get people addicted to their software,
Yeah.
uh, it just disgusted me.
Mhm.
And And I also realized that IT was disconnecting me from myself. It was disconnecting me from nature. It was just that little laptop and me, and lots of hours having to keep up with all the new changes happening in technology.
Mhm.
And I wasn't happy, I was feeling like a frog in a well and very disconnected from myself also. Yeah. So, but it took some time for me to, so that disconnect or that disillusionment started setting in after, let's say, 12 years or so. But
Mhm.
it took several more years for me to really feel that visceral disgust for the work I was doing.
Mm.
And when I felt that, and I think it was because I wasn't listening to my instincts for so many years that, I mean, I've
Mm.
realized one thing in my life that when things become visceral, it's only when you've not been listening or when I've not been listening to my instincts for a long time.
Mhm.
So I reached a point where I was totally disgusted with my work. I reached a point where I couldn't wake up in the morning to do my work, to write software. And so that's when I mean, I felt like I needed to do something in the morning just so that I have motivation to get up. So I started journaling. I mean, I'd start journaling with my breakfast. And journaling was something I had been doing for a long time. I mean, several years, at least 20 years before I left IT. I used to write a little bit in my diary every day. And so I started journaling, and I'd spend the first 3 hours of my day journaling. I'd feel fully satisfied and satiated in my heart, and then
Mm.
I'd start work. And I love journaling so much, yeah. I love journaling so much that on weekends, I'd write all day long. And I'd write about anything. I'd write about my past, about what I wanted to do, about what I was feeling, what I was observing, um, anything and
And
everything.
you were
Ideas
just
I
writing for yourself, right? You weren't writing for anyone else. It was just for your own satisfaction.
just for my own satisfaction.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, whatever was going on in my mind, that's what I wrote. Or what I wanted to do in life, what
Mhm.
I liked, what I did not like, what I had experienced, anything and everything that came to my mind. Sometimes I'd read an article, and then I'd journal about that.
Mhm.
Uh, so that way. And a few months passed, and I realized that, I could actually write all day long without feeling tired. And there was this huge difference between my work in IT and when I was writing. Uh, IT left me disconnected, journaling connected me with myself.
Mm.
IT left me feeling grumpy, while
Mm.
journaling left me feeling really satisfied in my heart, happy and satisfied.
Mhm.
And IT left me exhausted, honestly, and journaling would reinvigorate me. And I realized that, okay, so, I love writing, and I need to get out of IT and I need to get into writing.
Mm.
Uh, but I had no clue what I'd write. I mean, there were many things in my mind, but I really wasn't an expert at anything besides a bit of an expert in IT. And
Mhm.
IT is something I didn't want to write about. And besides IT, I knew nothing else.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was kind of interesting. And that's when I went back to my trip. So I left IT in 2020, and I had done this trip to Tiruvannamalai in 2019, about a year before I left IT. Uh, and I had made copious notes, because I love to journal. I had made copious notes on that trip. And so that was the first book I wrote, that was a travelogue.
Mhm.
And I promoted it on social media, free of cost. And a lot of my friends liked it, I mean, they found it humorous, they found it fun.
Mhm.
Said, why don't you do more of this? And so I wrote a little more about traveling, but I realized that, it wasn't really selling much. Even though people love reading it, it wasn't selling much. So
Mhm.
I wrote a few short stories from the Mahabharata, which was a very early love of mine, I'll say. I used to read that epic, a comic book of that epic, like a graphic novel. And I
Mhm.
used to read that as a child many times. And so I started writing short stories from the Mahabharata. and I enjoyed that. That sold a little bit more, but not much. And then I started reading the unabridged Mahabharata, the full thing, which is about 100,000 couplets. And on pages, the English translation is about 6,000 pages.
That's so long. So how big is that book?
I tell you.
Is it like
Oh, it's a collection of 10 books, and it's like massive. But the one I
oh,
have is on my Kindle, so it doesn't appear too big. It's
right.
just that I keep on reading, and I'm still on 1%, 2%.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. But the paper thing is like massive, it's really like it's a collection of 10 books.
Yeah. And the graphic
Uh,
novel is do you know how many books are in that series?
two books only.
Two books only. Do you know if it's available in English? Because I think I read
Yeah.
that before, or maybe you told me that you had read the graphic novel, and so I tried to look up if there was a version of it that English readers could use could find, but I wasn't able to find anything. Was yours in English?
Yes, yes. I'll share the link with you. In fact, it's the one which I read back in the 70s is available
Mhm.
on Internet Archives, so it's available in the public domain.
Oh, cool. That's great. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So I'll share the link with you.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And
So I
go ahead.
started reading that. Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you. What were you saying?
No, I said go ahead.
Okay. So I started reading the unabridged Mahabharata, and I realized that the real gems of the Mahabharata, the parts of the Dharma,
Hmm.
were there in the conversations, in the decisions that people made, the reasons behind those decisions. And
Can
I
I
thought,
stop
my
you real quick?
God,
I don't know what a
yes,
dharma
please.
is.
Yeah. So to put it very simply, Vanessa, dharma is that which sustains.
Okay.
Uh, if that's like a one-line definition, when you imbibe the dharma, dharma is that which, when you imbibe, it sustains. It sustains you. It sustains your relations. It sustains the world around you and the entire web of human relations, not just
Hmm.
with other humans, but uh, with humans and animals, humans and plants, humans and earths, humans and the
Would
subtler realms.
writing for you be dharma?
Partially. So let me say this, I'll just come back to the definition and tell you what Sri Aurobindo said about dharma. And he
Hmm.
says it's a law that sustains all possible relations in the universe. It's a law that literally sustains the universe. And he sees the universe as an interrelated part. So none of us are really, no life is isolated.
Hmm.
All forms of life are interrelated in the higher realms. And the cosmic law, which
Hmm.
sustains and nourishes everything in the universe, is dharma.
Okay.
So compassion becomes dharma.
Hmm.
Hurting somebody becomes adharma, the opposite of dharma.
Okay.
And then so this is like the larger meaning of dharma. And then there are different types of dharmas. So let's say there would be a dharma of a child towards her father or towards her parents.
Hmm.
There would be dharma of parents towards the child. There would be dharma of a child towards her teacher, dharma of the teacher towards the child, and
Hmm.
dharma of one towards relatives, dharma of a person towards her ancestors, let's say,
Hmm.
and the dharma of ancestors towards that person, dharma of a person towards the devas, the beings in the higher realms, dharma of one towards animals, towards everything,
Hmm.
So these are the dharmas of relationship. Then there are dharmas of occupation. So let's say somebody serving in the army would have the dharma of a warrior. A scholar would have the dharma of a scholar. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is the correct code of conduct? So there is this nourishment, there is also duty. What is the duty of a scholar?
Mm-hmm.
What is the duty of an architect? So it's
Mm-hmm.
bringing that integrity of sustenance into your work. That is also
Mm-hmm.
dharma.
Mm-hmm. That's
Uh,
beautiful.
yeah, yeah. And so that's dharma. And then there are other forms of dharma. For example, when a soul, there's a whole notion of evolution of the soul. So soul evolves
Mm-hmm.
from a being who's more interested in physical pleasures.
Mm-hmm.
And as the soul, so no, that is like if you consider Maslow's hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
initially a soul is more interested in physical pleasures.
Mm-hmm.
And the soul at that point is also very egocentric, slightly
Mm-hmm.
violent. As the soul progresses in spiritual maturity, the
Mm-hmm.
desires transcend into creative desires, and the physicality, even though it is there, it becomes finer and finer,
Mm-hmm.
and so the soul keeps on transcending, and all this happens by following the four goals of life, which also the Mahabharata explains beautifully. They are
Mm-hmm.
called the four Purusharthas, and they are dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So dharma is, I explained to you, the sustenance and duty. These two things are dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Artha is finances and resources.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order to sustain, you need resources and finances.
Mm-hmm.
However, the pursuit of artha is always balanced with dharma. So you don't make money by harming something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like ethical making of money.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is
Like
kama,
not
which is
addicting people
pleasure,
to internet.
not addicting people to the internet.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also not harming the environment, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So everything, the entire web of life. Then there is kama, which is pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the entire spectrum of pleasure, right from physical pleasure to mental pleasure to creative pleasure to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is moksha, which is most of the time it's defined as a final liberation of the soul from the cycle of birth and death. But from my readings, I believe that there is an alternate explanation also,
Mm-hmm.
which is the liberation of the soul from forced rebirth. So, there is one kind of rebirth which is forced because
Mm-hmm.
of the weight of karma. Because of the things that the soul has done in the past, it has to come back to repay the
Mm-hmm.
wrong things it has done.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it has to come back because the desires are so strong that it wants to get back into a body. And so the soul comes for that. But there's another subtle kind of rebirth, which is that a soul comes back to perform its duty towards existence itself. So it's a rebirth, not by force or not by the weight of karma,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a willing rebirth where the soul is literally walking on the razor's edge with one foot in the eternal, one foot in the material, and walking with immense skill so that it can transcend through that life while enjoying it and while doing its duty, but without being overly attached to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I have reason to believe that this also might be a sort of moksha.
And what was moksha again?
It's the liberation of the soul
Okay.
from the
Okay.
cycle of birth and death. And so I'm making a distinction between many people see moksha as never being born again, just sitting in complete bliss in the higher regions of existence, where we
Mm-hmm.
exist as some sort of energy, or maybe something so subtle that it's not even energy, like the absolute essence of us. And so what I gave after that was an alternate explanation, which I believe might also be true. But I'm really using the word might,
Mhm.
because I cannot be sure of that.
So I feel like in our culture, in American culture, we use the word karma very loosely. I don't think that we use it very accurately. Usually, we use it in terms of like, if you do something bad will come back to bite you in the butt. But it's usually in, within a set time frame, like maybe within like a couple of years, your karma is going to come back for you. So is that an accurate description, or is it more on a long term scale that is actually accurate?
Yeah, it's on a much larger scale, So,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, the Hindu Dharma also makes a distinction between several different types of karmas.
Mm-hmm.
Some karmas are light, some karmas are very heavy, some karmas will, the time at which a karma fructifies also depends on the evolution of the soul. For very evolved souls, the karma will fructify immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So if they do something even slightly wrong, they will get the result like possibly within hours.
Mm-hmm.
But for an immature soul, for a soul who's not that evolved, they may not get the results for lifetimes. The bad
Mm-hmm.
results will come only after lifetimes. Uh, and one more thing is, and this is uh, the way karma really works is very difficult to decipher. In what form that response will come is also not so easy to decipher. When it will come is also not easy to decipher.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And of course, there are gradations of karma. If you think of the law, if you think of regular law, when somebody breaks the law,
Mm-hmm.
if you jump a traffic light, it's a small violation. But
Mm-hmm.
there are much larger violations that are possible.
Right.
And the punishment given for breaking a traffic light is much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps if you plead to the judge that, I'm really sorry, I did it by mistake, this is the first time, the judge might even pardon you, without even a fine.
Uh-huh.
And if he feels you're genuine, but
Yeah.
however, if there is, yeah, but if somebody's done something really bad, and if they plead that, look, I did this by mistake, the judge is not going to pardon them. And that's how it
Mm-hmm.
works for karma also. There are
Mm-hmm.
types of karmas which could be pardoned by doing certain spiritual processes, by
Mm-hmm.
chanting, by asking for forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
by really repenting from within. And these are simple things, which change your consciousness. At the end of the day, Vanessa, karma serves two purposes. One is to help the soul evolve, because the soul is going to keep on doing wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to keep on acting against dharma. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to accumulate, it's going to become a bad soul. And it's also going to create trouble in the entire universe, in this web of life.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the soul needs to be brought back into a wholesome direction. So that's one reason for karma.
Mm-hmm.
And the second reason is that when somebody does bad to somebody else, that person genuinely wants atonement, and so
Mm-hmm.
karma balances that also. So karma serves these two purposes, it's like a balancing of records to
Mm-hmm.
atone for what the other person has suffered, but it's also to bring the soul back into a wholesome track. And now,
Mm-hmm.
how this entire equation is going to work out is very difficult to say. But if a person willingly tries to work on their consciousness, a lot of the milder karmas just fall away.
Okay. And
So that's
so
how it works. And it
doing this
happens over like lifetimes, A karma might even fructify like 10,000 years from now.
right. Okay, because we're talking very long term, because your soul is rebirthing in different forms.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
And so now that you're no longer in IT at all.
Absolutely not. Besides the cell phone and the camera and speaker, I
Uh-huh.
have nothing to do with IT.
How did
And I'm so happy for that.
how would you describe your experience um, doing what you're doing now as opposed to what you were doing before? How are you? Do you feel a physical difference?
Oh, yeah. My whole body, my whole being feels light and happy.
Mm,
Earlier I used to feel this heaviness. And, I tell everyone, that the day I left IT, there's that thing, no? Atlas shrugged. Atlas had this weight of the whole world on him, and he
right.
left the
Yeah.
weight, he shrugged, and I felt like that, and I felt like this huge weight was pushed off my shoulders. Uh,
Yes,
but
I
I
can
felt I
imagine.
feel happy now. I feel like waking up in the morning, and at night, when the day is about to come to an end, I actually feel sad that I have to stop writing.
That's a beautiful feeling.
That is so nice. I work on weekends because it doesn't feel like work.
Mm, mhm. And so
And no, it's beautiful.
do you not feel that writing is isolating? Because you describe the IT world as isolating, but I would imagine that you would have to spend a lot of time alone as a writer, or do you get connection elsewhere and somehow else?
So here's the thing, Vanessa, writing also needs me to read a lot.
Mhm.
And because of my reading, I am a part of some book groups, and I've made such wonderful friends in those book groups.
Mm,
So that's one form of connection. I feel
mhm.
that every book connects me to the author and the characters in the book. So that's where I find another form of connection. And then I attend these literary fests. There are lit fests going.
I was gonna ask, you know, for those who connect with what you were saying before about not listening to their gut, not listening to your gut for a really long time and not listening to your instincts. Do you have any advice for anyone who might be in that same situation, who might want to connect with themselves a little bit better? How would you advise them to go forward in starting to, you know, have that conversation between their head and their gut?
Yeah, oh my God, that's such a fantastic question, Vanessa. And I have personally experienced two phases of this question. One phase was when I was completely disconnected from myself, and so I couldn't even figure out that I'm getting messages from my gut. And
Mm-hmm.
then there was a phase when I could figure out that I'm getting some sort of message, but I couldn't really figure out what the message was and what I'm supposed to do. Uh, the
Mm-hmm.
first part of this equation, where we are so disconnected, a person is so disconnected that they can't even figure out uh, the intuitive messages that they are receiving. I think there are a
Mm-hmm.
few reasons for this, Vanessa. One reason is speed. And there was a Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
monk called Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche who had a lot to say about speed. The speed with which we are living our lives right now, rushing from one task to another task, filling ourselves with information, social media, doom scrolling. The
Mm-hmm.
speed doesn't give us a chance to pause and connect with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it literally pulls us away from our heart and our consciousness. And so the first thing would be to slow down. That would be the absolute first thing because it's impossible to listen to any kind of instinct if we are going at the speed we go at nowadays. So the first
Mm-hmm.
thing is to slow down. Second thing is to reduce consumption. Even once we slow down, we have become so addicted to consumption and so addicted to those who are more in the physical world are addicted to
Mm-hmm.
physical consumption. Those who are in the mental world are addicted to mental consumption. They want to read 52 books or 100 books in a year. And
Mm-hmm.
this kind of consumption is also equally harmful because the brain can only really take so much at a time. And when we fill the
Mm-hmm.
brain constantly, when we are constantly taking things, whether it's television or movies or video games or information from books or podcasts or whatever it is, And excuse me for saying podcasts. Um,
No, yeah.
yeah, but whatever it is, what if you're taking too much, uh, then our mind is like an attic which is overstuffed with all sorts of junk, and it's
Mm-hmm.
impossible to do anything in that attic. And that is
Mm-hmm.
also something that's going to disconnect because our mind gets so confused. It's so full of information uh, that we get completely disconnected from ourselves. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
a third reason is suppressing our emotions. And here there are actually two, I'll say there are two bad guys out here. One is, yeah, one is when I was working back in the early 90s, there was this phrase that when you come to work, leave your emotions at the door. So people were literally expected to be robots at work.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
when I said the sad part is, I thought that this was integrity at work. See, the way these things get twisted, the way these messages get twisted, something that was so harmful to me, I thought was showing
Mm-hmm.
integrity at work. So I actually did that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
whatever was going on in my life, when I entered the door to start my work, I put everything outside. And I
Mm-hmm.
did that. But what was happening is, of course, I was working from morning to night. And so I never had a chance to really connect with my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So the corporate culture that we have is extremely toxic. And if you add to that the rat race, the treadmill, and the typical corporate ladder, all these things get together to shut ourselves from our own emotions. And we are chasing some kind of a dream, which is just a mirage. It doesn't give us anything in the long run. But that also disconnects us from ourselves. One
Mm-hmm.
more thing that disconnects us, Vanessa, is childhood trauma. And what really happens, whether the childhood trauma has come from home, whether it has come from school or anywhere, when we face sustained and small but sustained trauma, what happens is we don't realize something bad is happening, and so we never really fight back. But that creeps into our consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing reverses where we start thinking that we are wrong. And over time, that disconnects us with our own selves, because, and it creates this kind of a void in the heart. So, for
Mm-hmm.
people who want to really connect with themselves, I'll say that first and foremost, please slow down, spend time in nature. Nature is such a wonderful healer. Like if you go out and hug a
Mm-hmm.
tree, spend some time with animals, it really connects you with, for a moment, that person is going to forget the corporate world and even question what they're doing in life. All you need to do is hug a tree 5 times and you'll start questioning what you're doing in life. So, slow down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Slow down, connect with nature, journal a lot. Simple things like,
Okay, let's see if this works better. Hopefully this will work. Okay. So
yeah.
I'll just start with what I was saying before. Um, so when I first started looking into this topic, I really had no frame of reference for what it was, and I feel like I'm not alone in this. Coming from Texas, coming from the United States, there's not a large Indian population where I am, and so I felt really out of my element. It was kind of an intimidating topic to research because I really had no grasp for even what the Mahabharata was. I just knew that it was a book of poems or verses, and I didn't know its significance, or I really knew nothing. I mean, it was really like a start from scratch, sit in the classroom, schoolgirl. I know nothing. So it felt very, I don't know, scary, but also exciting to learn about something that I had absolutely no knowledge of prior. So with that in mind, because I feel like there are probably people who are like me in the audience who have this, kind of, they don't have a frame of reference. I want to take a step back first and have you talk a little bit about your about India, and then I would like you to talk a little bit about how you feel like it might be something that we can relate to in the West. That makes sense. Let's just start with
Yeah.
the first
Let,
question.
yeah. India as it is right now, Vanessa, is very diverse. There is, we have, there are every state, almost every state has a different language. Sometimes in different parts of the state, the dialects will differ. Uh, every state has different cuisines.
Mm,
People, in subtle ways, people might dress differently. The
mhm,
traditions and customs are different sometimes. But of course, there's also a thread binding everything together.
mm,
But even with that thread, there is a lot of diversity in general.
mhm,
Now, if you add to that, rural India and urban India
mm,
are also diverse in their own ways.
mhm,
For example, urban India has adopted more values from the West,
mhm,
adopted the kind of lifestyle in the sense there are many skyscrapers, many cars, lots of traffic.
mm,
The way people live, the aspirations that they have are fairly similar to the Western world.
mhm,
Uh, However, recently, many people have started, I'll say, re-examining their roots, because once people realize that we are living on a treadmill, the way our lifestyle is not really sustaining us, people have tried to go back to their roots.
mhm,
But, this spectrum also exists in India. So with so much diversity, it's really difficult to make one or even a few statements about India.
mm,
But what I'll tell you is Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So Sri Aurobindo was a sage who lived in Pondicherry,
mhm,
uh, and um, he passed away, I think, in 1950 or the early 1950s. Uh, and his spiritual consort, the mother, her name was Mira Alfasa. She was a French lady. Uh, so the mother said that every country has a soul. So she mentioned, and she said this for every country, although I don't remember the description she's given for all the countries, but she specifically said the soul of Japan is very sensitive, kind of live in a really nice way. And you can
mhm,
also see that in the culture, in way people will stand in a line even when there's a disaster looming.
mm,
And she said that the soul of India is spiritual.
mm,
So this, so I'll draw from that statement. Despite of all the diversity, despite of the modernity, at the core of India is a spiritual essence
mm,
that believes that we are not the body, we are the soul. And the soul has a journey that goes from one lifetime to another lifetime. It's a journey of evolution of the
mm,
soul, It's a journey of spiritual evolution
mhm,
that increases in love and spiritual wisdom. And we believe in the law of karma.
mhm,
And in ancient India, people lived according to those four purusharthas, which I spoke about: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. But
mhm,
that doesn't really happen that much now. But that
mhm,
core ethos of dharma, karma, and the soul is still there. Although in some people it's at a deeper level, in some people it's at a more surface level.
mhm. So You describe India as very diverse. Are there how many different religions are there?
There is Hinduism,
Hmm.
there is Buddhism, there is Christianity, there is Islam, there is Judaism, there is Zoroastrianism. So, six religions that I
Mm.
know of. I have
Hmm.
visited a Baha'i temple in Delhi, so I'm sure there's a Baha'i population also.
Hmm.
So, at least seven religions that I know of,
Hmm.
and possibly more. And of
Hmm.
course, then there are people who have ancient shamanic faiths also. And although Hinduism is to a large extent shamanic,
Hmm.
but there would be people who are more connected with nature, people who live in the forest. They'd be far more connected with nature and their shamanic roots than people who live in towns and cities.
So the Mahabharata, does it belong primarily to the Hindu religion, or do you feel like it is something that is relatable to all religions within India?
No, it's primarily the Vedic religion, the Vedic Hindu religion.
Okay.
So the Hindu religion, regardless of, so Hindu religion is very pluralistic. There are different deities, and each deity offers a path to liberation. Besides that, there are also several worldviews, several philosophies. They are called darshanas, and so there are six well-known worldviews, and then there are a few more also.
Hmm.
So that way, it's very, very pluralistic. But all of them trace the teachings to the Vedas. And these are, you can think of the Veda as a field, and these are the different flowers that grow in that field.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of the Mahabharata as Vedic pluralistic Hinduism.
Okay. Okay. And so you were introduced through a comic book or a graphic novel as a child. Is that right?
Yes.
And what did you think about it when you first started reading it?
I don't think I understood the finer philosophical aspects,
Mm.
but something connected in my heart to the characters and the way they lived. Uh, there was this simplicity and lack of artifice in them. Uh, most of them lived a lot in nature, so I'd see a lot of groves and trees and streams in the pictures, in the images, and something attracted me to that.
Mm.
I grew up in Mumbai, which was a metropolis city. It still is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had never seen so much greenery or
Mm.
groves and rivers and lakes. And so I felt very attracted to that. I felt attracted to a way of life that revolves around that.
Yeah.
And then these characters would, go to these sacred rivers and sacred mountains and worship out there. And I thought there was something very beautiful about that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were always acting with integrity. They had this moral compass, uh, which they never compromised on, regardless of what situation they were in. And so there was this rock solid integrity in the characters, or at least in the noble characters. And so that drew me a lot to the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were these gods, who were wonderful. And I didn't understand the deeper philosophical message of the gods, but I
Mm-hmm.
just loved looking at their images. So yeah, these were the things that really attracted me to the story back then.
And what do you feel like attracts you to it today?
The subtle dharma, the dharma that speaks about sustenance,
Mm-hmm.
which has certain formulae which can be used, let's say 80 to 90% of the time, but there are times which is known as dharma sankat or conflict. And the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata happens at this point of conflict when one of the characters, Arjun, so there's this battle, and on one side are the Pandavas, other side are the Kauravas, and Arjun is one of the Pandavas, and Krishna is on the side of the Pandavas. He is in fact Arjun's charioteer. So now Arjun is seeing the army opposite him, the so-called enemy army,
Mm-hmm.
and he's seeing his cousins, he's seeing his uncles, he's
Mm.
seeing his teachers, and he recollects, uncle, so his name is Bhishma, and he recollects that as a small child, he'd be out playing, and his clothes were all soiled in mud, and he'd run into the lap of his uncle. And his uncle would laugh, his uncle wouldn't be angry that you're soiling my clothes. His uncle would laugh and hug him.
Mm.
And now his uncle is on the opposite side of the war, and he
Mm-hmm.
actually has to attack him. And he completely breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I cannot do this. It's impossible for me to do this. So that's a Dharma Sankat. On
Mm-hmm.
the one hand, he has to fight this war because the whole war happened when Mother Earth went to a celestial being called Brahmadev to ask for help. A lot of negative forces had taken birth on Earth. So, in the opposite side of the army were also a lot of negative forces who were his cousins. And there were noble people also who were fighting for the negative forces simply out of a sense of loyalty
Mm-hmm.
because they were associated for so many years in the same palace. Uh, so the war was a war of dharma, where Mother Earth was suffering a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that war had to be fought in order for her suffering to cease, for adharma to end and for dharma, right sustenance, to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So the war had to be fought. But now on the other side are some cousins who had done unthinkable evil to the Pandavas.
Mm.
But there were also their own teachers. There were their uncles. There were their uncles who loved them, who could have given their lives for them. And there were certain other relatives whom they had a deep love for.
Mm-hmm.
And so Arjun breaks down and he says, I cannot do this. And so that's a conflict. That's a dharma sankat where you have your one dharma towards your uncle,
Mm-hmm.
you have another dharma towards earth and towards dharma itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mahabharata says that it is your duty to protect the dharma. It is the duty of noble people to protect the dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so now here's a conflict, and Arjun doesn't know how to resolve the conflict. So he completely breaks down. And that's when Sri Krishna gives a message of the Bhagavad Gita where he explains that every person on the opposite side is a soul. And the soul is eternal. It was never born, and hence it will never die.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to die is only the body. But this whole concept of dharma sankat, of conflict, of your duty towards one and your duty towards something else coming into conflict,
Mm-hmm.
results in a situation of paralysis. You don't know what to do now. So it
Mm-hmm.
takes a very subtle spiritual intelligence to understand the right thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
which cannot be formulaic because it depends on so many factors that the only way to figure out the right thing is to develop that higher spiritual intelligence through reflection and meditation and other spiritual practices,
Mm-hmm.
chanting, connecting with the higher beings, like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that subtle dharma, is what attracts me to the epic right now.
Mm-hmm. And so, are you working on another book right now?
I want to write many books based on the Mahabharata
Mm-hmm.
that connect the Mahabharata with contemporary times and contemporary conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to write books about how various characters resolve the conflicts in their life and what was the basis of their thought process. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also doing a major rehaul of my website, and
Okay.
that will take me some time. So once I'm done with that, uh, I will start writing these books.
And how do you feel like the Indian culture today relates to the Mahabharata? Do you feel like people still feel like they're connected to it, or it's just a piece of literature that is interesting, or is it something to live by? How do you feel like people currently in today's world, in India especially, relate to it?
Most people, I'll say, who are at least in their 40s, have grown up listening to stories of the Mahabharata, 40 and upwards.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even some people in their mid 30s and upwards
Mm-hmm.
have grown up listening to stories from the Mahabharata. And so that connection is there. Because you heard it so often in your childhood, it creates this connection in the heart. And they may be completely immersed in the treadmill, in the corporate treadmill right now.
Mm-hmm.
But still, that connection with the deities of the Mahabharata, the teachings, they are still there and they resurface from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that thread of connection is there, but many are not living the principles that are taught in the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm.
Some have started going back to understand the principles. So there is this movement back where people are trying to re-establish their connection with the ancestors, with their tradition, and they're trying to understand the principles. And some are actually trying to embody it. The thing, Vanessa, about a worldview is that even if you understand it logically, if you don't embody it, uh, you cannot really live that worldview.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot like fear, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just giving you an analogy, because fear is the simplest thing that we know as an embodied thing. You feel it in every cell of your body, when you feel fear.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say joy. Um, Joy is not so embodied, So
Mm-hmm.
something that we think of as joy, let's say if one is enjoying over a few glasses of beer, so much of that joy is very surface level. It doesn't really go all the way to the heart and every cell of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So to really live a philosophy, it has to be embodied at that level, at the cellular level, at the level
Mm-hmm.
of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people are making an intellectual return to the roots. It will take some time for that return to become embodied, so that people are actually living it without necessarily even thinking about it, like
Mm-hmm.
living it as second nature. That's going to take some time. And
But
then there are many people who are so disconnected from their own culture that they are not interested,
mm-hmm.
and they are moving towards, forgive me for using this word, but they're moving towards what I'd call the liberal atheist
Mm-hmm.
ideology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for being liberal. Being liberal is nice. It's being liberal in the mind, being large hearted, being large minded.
Mm-hmm.
But the liberal atheist is a combination which I feel is very twisted. And so I won't talk more about politics right now. But it disconnects us from our roots. It disconnects us from our own heart, our soul, our energy. And
Mm-hmm.
it connects us with an ideology that lives only in the mind. It's a very ungrounded sort of ideological existence.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who are very disconnected, who are either in this ungrounded ideological life,
Mm-hmm.
or they are completely in the corporate life of consumption and making money.
Mm-hmm.
Consumerism and making money. Sorry, not consumption, but consumerism and making money. So there is a large population like that also. So
Mm-hmm.
there is again, once again, a huge amount of diversity
Right.
to the extent people connect with the tradition.
But you feel like the younger generations are not as connected to it as the older generations, because you said 30, mid 30s and above have a connection to it, but the younger ones are haven't had the experience of, I, I don't know, having yeah.
I think what's happening with people in their late 20s is they've grown up with parents. Uh, you know, their parents were relatively far more affluent than the parents of people who are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s right now.
Mhm.
And not only were they more affluent, but they were in corporate culture, like totally in corporate culture, late night teleconferences, and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So they've had very little exposure to Indian culture as such, the
Mm.
traditional Indian culture.
Mhm.
I've seen the way my grandfather lived, and he was the generation which fought for the freedom struggle of India. So his generation fought the British during the freedom struggle. And in his early days, he used to wear a suit and a hat. And when the freedom struggle really took on a momentum, he
Mhm.
burned down all his suits and hats and went back to wearing traditional Indian clothes.
Mhm.
And so, but his entire generation, regardless of what they wore, at least I've seen in my family, were deeply content. When I said the kind of contentment that I've seen in them, zero consumerism, and deep contentment and a connection with their ancestors and the tradition of this land
Mhm.
was very deep. What I've seen in my parents was far more shallower than that.
Mhm.
What I've seen in my own early life was even shallower.
Mhm.
And what I see in the people in their mid 30s, late 20s is like negligible. But
Mhm.
once again, people who are like maybe 10 years old, kids who are 10 years old. So there's again a huge, uh, in my generation, so people who are late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, there is this huge movement back to our roots,
Mm.
wanting to find out what our roots really are.
Mhm.
Because I've gone through this cycle of IT, I've seen how much it disconnected me, how much the corporate world disconnected me.
Mhm.
And there are many people in this boat. And so there's this revival of going back to the roots. And the kids of these people are being reintroduced to the tradition.
Mhm.
So I'll say that the very young generation are going to again come back to the tradition, but there
Mhm.
is a huge population in between that's disconnected.
So is the Mahabharata, is it a sacred text like we would like the Bible, the Quran? Is it like that, or is it um more of just a historical text?
It's so under the entire Indian literary canon, there are the Vedas, the four Vedas. They are the sacred texts.
Mhm.
Uh, then there is something which is known as the Itihas Purana.
Mhm.
And then there is something which is known as the Darshan. So the Darshans are the philosophies. They are the different ways in which you can interpret the Vedas in their larger worldview, and the worldview meaning answering questions like what is the eternal, what is the human soul, what is the connection between the soul and the eternal. There are many views of this. So they
Mhm.
are the philosophies. So the most sacred texts are the Vedas, the Tantras, which are which some people say are based on the Vedas, and some people say they are parallel to the Vedas.
Mhm.
But they connect with the deities and they are more experiential and less philosophical.
Mhm.
So they teach you how to experience the higher energies and the highest plane of freedom
Mhm.
through their practices. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana come under the itihas. So itihas technically translates as uh, this is what happened. So you can say it is historical in a certain sense. However, hey, can you hear me?
Okay. Do you remember what you were saying when we dropped off?
I think we were, yeah, I think we were at the part where we were talking about how disconnected many people are
Okay.
from our tradition,
Okay.
and but the younger people uh, So there is this movement back to the roots,
Mhm.
and people are getting reconnected.
That's good. I feel like
Yeah,
I think, that pendulum that swings one way to the left and one way to the right is always going. We go one way or we disconnect, and then we feel like we have gone too far and then swing all the way back. And we're always trying to find
all
that
the way back. Yeah,
that middle ground where we can have a balance and a connection at the same time.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's my quest also, Vanessa,
Hmm.
to find that middle ground where I can earn what I need to earn
Hmm.
through my work,
Hmm.
but also be content with what I have and live in a way where uh, I'm living in balance with the whole web of life, so to say.
Hmm. What do you feel
Yeah.
like? We're going to wrap up pretty quickly, but what do you feel like are some misconceptions of the Mahabharata for Indian people and also people maybe in the West?
I think one of the biggest misconception, at least for people outside of India, is that the Mahabharata is the story of battle between two cousins over property. I mean, between two sets of cousins over property.
Hmm.
I mean, so yeah, there is a battle, and there is one group of cousins and another group of cousins, but that's not really the crux of the story. The battle is simply a small part of a much larger narrative of bringing dharma back on earth, or
Hmm.
bringing that balance back on earth. So that's the real story. Um,
Hmm.
in India, so that's the misconception that people from outside of India might have.
Hmm.
In India, I'd say that the misconception is unfortunately many people, a greater majority of the people have not read the unabridged Mahabharata. So what people really have read is the condensed version of about 600 or 700 pages,
Hmm.
which is just one tenth of the whole epic, and that contains only the events. So people are aware of the events and people are aware of the Bhagavad Gita and its teachings,
Hmm.
but they aren't aware of uh, a huge amount of wisdom in the Mahabharata,
Hmm.
which comes in those conversations and decisions.
Hmm.
And so they only have a partial view of the epic, is what I'd say.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not much of a misconception, but I'd say a partial view of the epic in India.
And so, for people who maybe don't want to read 6,000 pages, what would you suggest they do in order to, have a better understanding that included the wisdom that is intended to be imparted on its readers?
They could do two things, Vanessa. One is that they could first read the Bhagavad Gita uh, and understand the Gita, because that's, let's say, the core philosophy of the Dharma.
Hmm.
And then they can read the full Mahabharata. I mean, they can uh, get the book on Kindle if they want to, and they can skip the passages that have geographical description and botanical description.
Hmm.
So there are many, about one third of the book is geography and botany. So, the ancients recorded much of geography and botany also in the epic.
Hmm.
So they can skip that part. So that still takes them to about 4,000 pages. Uh, Now, if they don't want to read that also, then that's exactly what I'm trying to do on my website. Is I'm trying to condense a Mahabharata but in a two-tier fashion. So the main narrative is the main story along with the subtle dharma,
Hmm.
and then there are links that go into detail. And
Okay.
but right now I've got about I think 120 odd posts on my blog. So
Hmm.
it's in the form of a blog book, and I've got about 120 posts, which
Hmm.
is still just half of the first of the 18 books. And once I'm, but yeah, once I'm done redesigning the website, I'll be publishing one post every day. so
Okay.
people can keep up with that, So I mean, it will be at a fairly good speed, it not too slow, not too fast, so people can keep up with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share links with you for the Bhagavad Gita, for the actual 6,000 page books that are out there,
Mm-hmm.
and my website, and people can choose how they wish to read it.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. Yeah. That feels a little bit more manageable because I feel like going into a 6,000 page book, and I like long books, but usually my long books are like 1,000 pages, but 6,000 pages is
I know, yeah, it's.
very long.
I hear you, Vanessa. 1,000 pages is long. I remember, I think it was Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, which was just a little over 1,000 pages.
Hmm.
And War and Peace, I think, was a little over 1,000 or maybe under 1,000. I don't remember.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, 1,000 is long, 6,000 is very long. I agree with you.
Well, there's so much more to cover in this epic because it's very long there seems to be a lot to it. But I think this is a good stopping point. And maybe when you have, in the future, we can come back and talk about all the things that we missed. Um, but this has been such an enlightening episode, and I
Thank
I
you.
feel like this will be so educational and inspirational for a lot of our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I love talking on this podcast, and it was fantastic to talk with you.
And of course, we'll include all the links that you provide, and we'll put them all up, including your website and the one for your books that are on Amazon. I think most of your books are on Amazon. Is that right?
Yeah, the travelogue and the short stories are on Amazon,
Perfect.
and the rest is on my website. Yeah.
Perfect. And thank you, folksy folks, for coming on this epic journey. What did you learn today? What did you know beforehand about the Mahabharata? And had you heard of it? We want to hear from you. So, where you can communicate with us and communicate with the other folksy folks is on our Facebook community group page. You can continue the conversation there. So, we have a page and then we have a community group where you can have these conversations. And we really encourage our listeners to go on there and have these conversations with one another, because that's the fun of having these philosophical conversations is that we keep that conversation going, and we have thoughts that come up afterwards, and we want to hear from you. So that's one of the best places to keep that conversation going. But also you can write comments down below on our YouTube page. So if you're watching, you can comment on our YouTube page. If you're listening, we encourage you to go to our Facebook group page. And don't forget to like, share with your neighbors as you're getting the mail, and subscribe so you're getting those notifications every single Tuesday. Those subscriptions really help to remind you, because we live, like we were talking about, in such a busy time where we're going all the time. It helps to get those notifications. So definitely subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or on those podcasting platforms. So thank you for unraveling the mysteries of folklore. And until next time, keep the folk alive.